Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And welcome to our session today, the third session of the IDDC Global Assembly Workshop and Building Back Inclusively. And the focus is on access to distance education, technology, the pitfalls and opportunities, looking at the learning education. This is a joint session organized by the IDDC Inclusive Education and Safeguarding Task Groups. And we all thank Fede for her support in organizing and supporting us throughout this session. Before we begin, I would simply like to highlight some housekeeping or practical points of information. Firstly, this session is being recorded and recording has started already. We have international sign. If I could please ask, just realized that a request came up. If you are not speaking, kindly, or not interpreting, kindly turn off your video and then switch on only when you're speaking yourselves. Yeah, just a few other pointers. The recording has already started. We have international sign interpretation and Kenyan Sign Language interpretation with us here today, as well as closed captioning. I just want to check, Angelique, is there a link to closed captioning, or they just press on the closed captioning icon on the screen? Could you clarify, please?
The link to captioning has been shared in the chat box, and you can also follow the captioning. They are ingested in the Zoom, so you should be able to see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, in this session, we won't have a question and answer directly during the presentations, but we would still like you to share your thoughts, your comments, and even questions, so that we can take this up in the breakout rooms in the discussions later after the presentations. If the chat box is not accessible for you, please intervene during the discussion by raising your hand in the raise hand icon, so that we can allow you to speak. And especially if someone is not clear or speaking too fast for you, please let us know. As I mentioned, the session is automatically being recorded with international sign interpretation and closed captioning. The breakout rooms will be recorded, then edited to include closed captioning later, so that you can access them later. But for today, the only breakout room that will have captioning will be breakout room 2. The others will be added at a later stage. But I'd like to, there are 3 breakout rooms, and some of you have already registered for these. Breakout room 1 will look at current practice and experience of access to digital learning, high to low and no cost solutions, led by Fede and Dipti. Breakout room 2, safeguarding issues for child protection as learning is provided online, by Lauren and Maria. And breakout room 3, current practice and experience of access to digital learning, innovative solutions, led by Sean, Will, and Georgine from Ikitabu. Some of you, as I said, will have registered already for one of the breakout rooms, but in case you've changed your mind or you want to join another breakout room, may I ask that you add the number 1, 2, or 3 next to your name to indicate which breakout room you'd like to join. As you'll see, I have 3 in front of my name and followed by my name. Fede has 1 in front of her, and I'm only picking out the people I can see Dipti has one in front of her. If you want needing access to international sign and closed captioning, please go to breakout room 2. Now, just to check, have I left anything out? Fede and Lauren or Angelique, anything to add, or may I carry on with the session? Great, thank you very much. Now to today's session. And as we look towards a future with more access to distance education and technology, we are considering during this session today the pitfalls, the opportunities, the lessons learned, and what we need to consider in safeguarding our learners to access digital learning. Learners with disabilities are amongst the least likely to benefit from distance learning solutions. This is something we have learned during this COVID experience. Many governments and countries have turned to digital learning in order to provide continued education through hybrid or blended learning solutions. But this has meant that learners with disabilities have been left behind. Girls with disabilities have been particularly affected. As some of you who joined the initial session yesterday of the IDDC General Assembly heard Gerard Quinn speaking, and he said in his address, the digital divide is disconcerting. It's not just about access, because digital learning does not actually suit everyone and is not available to everyone. And we know this, many, not just people with disabilities, but also others do not have access to technology in a rural area, wherever they live. However, there are solutions and there are good practice examples that we can learn from and discuss. And we need to consider the child protection issues. So I would like to turn to our first presenter today, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dipti Samat Raja, who is Social Development Specialist and Inclusion in Global Practice of the World Bank. Dipti provides technical assistance and operational support across sectors and regions in operationalizing disability inclusion. Dipti supports the implementation of the Disability Inclusive Education in Africa program and Inclusive Education Initiative Trust Fund. Previously, she worked as Director of International Programs and Senior Research at the Burton Blatt Institute of Syracuse University, and many other things. And over to you, Dipti.
Thank you, Shan, for that very warm welcome. And it is a real pleasure to be with you all today at this important thematic session. You know, Shan has already said a lot in terms of setting the stage for us. I mean, digital technologies can be catalytic tools in realizing the right to education for children with disabilities by advancing both educational access and learning. Even pre-pandemic, educational practices were transitioning to learning through technology in formal and informal learning environments. However, the potential of technology to improve educational outcomes for children with disabilities does not automatically translate to changes on the ground. Much depends on the larger ecosystem and the inherent skills, policies, institutions, and content within it. The reality is that persons with disabilities do face a digital divide. The UN flagship report on disability and development showed that households of persons with disabilities lag behind in both access to ICTs and the use of ICTs. So basically, in addition to just unequal access to digital infrastructure and connectivity, affordability gaps, there are digital skills gaps, and there are digital use gaps. As Sean also mentioned, girls with disabilities have even lower levels of access to technology. And with the strong pivot to distance learning over COVID, over this past year, many of these gaps have come into stark focus. World Bank's Inclusive Education Initiative, as many of you would know already, is currently conducting an ICT landscape review. The Global Disability Innovation Hub is our research partner in conducting this study, and we are actually also collaborating with Leonard Cheshire to complete this study. Now, the aim of this study is to try and offer some recommendations to strengthen both the supply and demand side interventions within the technology ecosystem. So in addition to getting data at the global level, we are also trying to do some deep dive case studies in Ethiopia, Nepal, Rwanda, Bangladesh, and Kenya to actually learn from the COVID-19 experiences. So let me share a bit more about this study today. What we've done is we've framed our data collection questions around the 6Ps framework, which is developed at Tech Hub. What are the 6Ps? Let me briefly go through those. So for people, and in this case, we are going to look at, of course, the experience of children with disabilities, but the other actors in the ecosystem. So the teachers, the parents, and caregivers, families, organizations of persons with disabilities, and the other stakeholder actors that are interacting within the ecosystem. Products. So yes, of course, the types of products that are out there, but also very importantly, their availability, their affordability. So we are looking at those dimensions. Pedagogy, what does it actually mean in terms of introducing a technology within the education system? How does it interact with curriculum? How are stakeholders actually being trained in using this technology to deliver learning? Policy, I really don't need to, I think, emphasize on the importance and the role of the larger policy environment and actually multi-sectoral policy environment for this group, of course. Place. This is really important. Where is the accessible technology being used? Is it at home? Is it in school? And then what is the infrastructure? What are the social factors surrounding that place? And the 6th P is provision. And that really looks at the service delivery channel, the service delivery system. So yes, of course, the cost, but what is the market like? What is the local demand? Who is being able to provide the technology in matching the child's needs to the appropriate technology solutions? So we are hoping that we can actually craft recommendations around all of the 6Ps. Now, so far, we are only midway through the study. So what we've done is we've conducted a number of listening sessions and roundtables, because what we wanted to do was basically learn from the knowledge that's already out there. Let me share some of the insights that have emerged from that process. Many of these are not going to be new to you, but I think it helps shape maybe our discussion for this thematic session. So the first is that, we speak about problems at the systems level, but when we try to identify what interventions exist, many of the solutions remain child-focused. I don't mean child-centered, which is the way we want to go, but child-focused. So it's very much still about, this is the type of disability, this is the type of technology, but we are not paying attention to the broader ecosystem. How are the children actually being or how can technology support curriculum adaptation? The next issue is most interventions remain at pilot stages, and we still really have difficulty in going to scale. Service delivery of technology for children with disabilities is still predominantly seen in special schools rather than mainstream schools. And in fact, at a different note, to the extent that these interventions even exist, they are when a child is able to access any kind of school system. So this means there's very little support for the children who have difficulty accessing school in the first place. Non-state actors are still the main providers of assistive and accessible technology. So it's really civil society organizations, organizations of persons with disabilities, charitable organizations, which again, of course, then impacts this going to scale if this is very much driven by non-state actors. We've seen a lot written about the role of teachers, both in terms of their role as facilitators, but also in terms of teachers' resistance to the use of technology. But that really needs to be seen in the context of the broader system, including low investments in their training and capacity building. a lot of the discourse includes very little discussion on children with disabilities themselves and their families. And if there's one thing we've learned during the COVID-19 distance learning, is that ensuring that parents and caregivers also have the tools and knowledge to support their children is crucial. Stigma continues to emerge as a significant factor, limiting access to both inclusive education and technologies, edtech, educational technologies. And then there are, country level challenges just in terms of administrative processes for men and financing. I'm going to pause there and just talk about some of the next steps in our study. One is that, like I said, we are still conducting our collection. So we are beginning our country level data collection, but we also have a global survey that's out right now for a range of stakeholders. We are sharing the link in the chat box. If you haven't yet taken it, please do click on the link. Please share it. Please give us your experiences. I will just say that we will continue to ensure that we share the findings of what we are learning, and we hope to work with all of you to drive, stronger solutions for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dipti. Good timing, but also I think a very good kickoff to our session, because I think we're all eagerly waiting for your report to come out. I think there's a great deal of learning around the 6 Ps, but also I thought very interesting, possibly not surprising, how the provision that is being made available is through specialist provision and through non-state actors. Clearly to work with governments to help that they take on the responsibility, and we support them to provide varieties of ways of accessing learning. So we look forward to providing input, and please, if you have completed the survey, please do. It's there in the chat box, shared for you all to complete. And I think with that, and thinking around solutions, I want to first check that Will Klurman from IDDC is here. So I don't have the full, can't see everyone's names in front of me. Great, Will is here. So, because I think now we move on to possibly one of the innovative solutions that has come out, and again, a non-state actor, but working with global movements and working with governments. I'd like to introduce you to Will Klurman, who is the co-founder and chief executive officer of IDDC. IDDC was founded on the principle of the educational impact of books and was started in 2012. And what an opportune time, I suspect that Will share with us a lot about how his work has grown over this last year and a half, and IDDC has come into its own. Accessible digital content for inclusive and quality education is their goal. And they have demonstrated innovation by designing cost, accessible stories and content for quality education, sustainably available and at scale. And without further ado, I would like to pass you on to Will and his team. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very kindly. My colleague, Georgina Omo Obura, is here with me, and the Kenyan Sign Language interpreters as well. Because there's so many people on this call, it seemed best that I go through the discussion part and share some slides with you. But Georgine will be leading our work in the Q&A in Breakout 3. So that's a small pitch for Breakout 3 in case anybody would like to join us there. So thank you again, Sean. Thank you for including us in this conversation. I guess, Angelique, I should share my screen, should I?
Yes.
Okay, will do. I'm on it. And you let me, if it's coming through. Is it all visible as it should be?
Yes, it's fine. Great, thank you. I mean, if you want to put it on the slideshow.
Yeah. I'm
okay. Thank
just
you. Thank you,
messing
Will.
around with
Yeah.
that to get me there. Where am I? Oh, here we go. We'll get there. The chat bars are floating around, and there we go. Where have we got my presentation mode? And there we go. Good enough. Sean, has it come through yet? There we go.
Yes, perfect. Just come
Okay,
through. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Will.
Before I just go through this and share some of the work that we're doing have been doing in remote learning during the COVID-19 pandemic, I know a number of colleagues on this call are familiar with this work and the work of Georgine in Studio KSL. I see Nafisa on the call, and I see others too who are very intimate with this work and have even contributed lots of great ideas to the progress of it, and even trying out new things, which we really greatly appreciate. So I'll make one quick comment about since the work of the EdTech Hub was referred, that Deepti talked about in a couple of her remarks. Anybody who has not yet read the recent systematic literature review by Lynch, Singal, and Francis that the EdTech Hub released in March of this year should really take a look at it. And if you want my highlighted copy, I'm happy to share that. We found it enormously helpful, timely, and thorough. The problems they point out in evidence of what works to include children with disabilities in improved learning outcomes. This is, it's if you have a sense that there are gaps between technology and improved learning outcomes, particularly improved learning outcomes for children with disabilities, then you're not alone in that belief. And the EdTech Hub systematic literature review does a really nice job of going through where those gaps are, and has suggestions on ways that we may be able to close some of them. So I'll leave that there, but that's also a topic, if anybody would like to discuss in the breakout, that we'd love to hear ideas and share ideas on the topic of how to build rigorous evidence that makes the link between, on the one hand, the use of technology, and on the other hand, inclusive learning outcomes. Okay, so quick, because I believe what Sean wanted us to cover here was some of the specific work that we've been doing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I apologize in advance. We're not intending to do a pitch here, but Sean's guidance was that we should be concrete about some of the initiatives. So I'll do that. Digital story time is one, the digital essay competition is another, and then teacher professional development that we've been doing. And I know Marie Skuman is on this call too, really under the leadership of Marie and Leonard Cheshire in Western Kenya and Marie's Girls Education Challenge project. We've learned enormous amounts from that, and we'll close with collaboration. So people here may recognize my colleague Georgine, who's on the call here. eKitabu delivers accessible digital content for inclusive and quality education. And this is Georgine working in Kenyan Sign Language with a child at this early stage of language acquisition, which we find is critically important in the learning progression of deaf learners specifically. Some people on this call are also familiar with the UNICEF Accessible Digital Textbook Project that we've been working in with UNICEF. In both Kenya and in Rwanda. And in that project, they have prioritized local sign language, so national sign language first instruction of deaf learners, which is a position, a view that Georgine strongly advocates for, both with government and in civil society. And the evidence that we've been gathering on that path is something that we're always interested to talk about and to share. Let's see. There we go. So digital story time, how it came together really was Georgine and team were building early grade storybooks for, in a number of countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, and Rwanda. And when the pandemic hit, March of last year, the Ministry of Education of Kenya, particularly Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, KICD. KICD reached out to us and asked if there would be, if we had ways that we could support deaf learners in broadcast. That is to say, on the government's Edu Channel TV. They wanted to know if the accessible digital content that we had been developing could somehow be used on television. We talked to them about it, we thought about it, and what we did was we took the sign language storybook videos that Georgine had produced, and we packaged them into 30-minute episodes that then KICD began broadcasting from April, 5 days a week in primetime slots on Edu Channel TV. And from there, when their readout to us, and they were enormously happy with it, was first ever sign language exposure that they had presented in, as they called it, normal learning of the term. That is to say, for all children, not just deaf learners, but hearing children and deaf children together. We've done qualitative research to see where that work is going, and even families of deaf children and hearing children together in the same family who are watching digital story time on Edu Channel TV and are learning Kenyan Sign Language together. The government tells us that the reach of that channel and program in prime time with 4 million viewers. So it's interesting to look at the possibilities of sign language for inclusion of not just deaf children in learning to read, but also as a way for deaf children and hearing children to learn a language that they can use together. And that's from the research we've been doing. We're seeing evidence that's happening, and it's very exciting to us. A second, there we go. A second initiative during COVID-19 is our digital essay competition that we made entirely digital. We've been running it for some years now in Kenya particularly, and are also prototyping a new writing competition in Rwanda that draws on the learning we've gotten. But in 2020, it became clear that we had to go entirely digital. In the past, we've accepted paper submissions, but to reduce the risk of coronavirus exposure to everybody involved, it seemed best or even necessary, in keeping with the government's COVID restrictions, that we encourage everyone who won't be closed, they should enter online.
Sorry to interrupt there, Will. You're coming to the end of your time now. Just
thanks, great. Thanks, Sean. Thanks. So the long and the short of it is that we had over 300 children with disabilities during COVID-19. We're very happy to have support from the teachers and Kenya's Ministry of Education Directorate of Special Needs Education. I can only emphasize the importance of collaboration with government to reach children both in and out of school. The final piece of this, there we go, is the teacher training in refreshable, really in Braille skills, but using low-cost assistive technology in the form of refreshable Braille devices that we've been doing with Marie and her team in Western Kenya, in support of their efforts, Leonard Cheshire's efforts to deliver inclusive education, not in special schools, but in inclusive settings. We've been training teachers not just to use technology, but more importantly, to build their Braille skills, because what we found out when we started delivering devices to teachers was that technology was nice to have, but the real gap was in reading and writing in Braille. So it was, that insight that we got with Marie and team 2 years ago pointed us in the right direction, and we built an instructional course with collaboration of the World Braille Council, Kevin Carey in particular, and we built an instructional course for teachers to build their Braille skills so that they in turn can support children in the return to schools. So I won't dwell on the universal design for learning because I think my time is up. So Sean, I'll just say on the focus. We think the technology is useful if it's useful, but we believe that the role of the teacher is more important. And so in increasing the use of the technology to improve learning outcomes, which we believe is the most important challenge to address, the role of teachers in harnessing technology, in guiding learners, and in realizing inclusive education is central to our work. So the framework of universal design for learning that I'm sure many people in this are familiar with is to us an excellent scaffold for changing the knowledge, attitudes, and practices of teachers, and we've made it central to the work that we're doing in multiple countries. A quick shout out to IDDC colleagues on this call and not on this call with whom we're working. We greatly appreciate the work of the people who are listed here. Yeah, we're very excited about the project that we're kicking off with Julia's team in Kenya, Humanity and Inclusion, working in Dadaab and Kakuma, and a number of other projects. I mentioned the work we're doing in Nafisa, it's in Ethiopia, and I warmly welcome anybody who wants to talk about any of the topics that we discussed here to come to Breakout 3. A final mention of the UNICEF Accessible Digital Textbook Project. If you're not familiar with it, it's been done over the past few years under the UNPRPD, and it is producing a good amount of high quality guidance from everything that we can see regarding how and which technologies to apply in inclusion of children with disabilities. Sean,
thank
back
you.
to you.
So sorry, Will. I know you have so
sorry.
much to say,
No,
and as you can see in breakout room 3, we'll have plenty to discuss, and I think you make some very important points there, you know, around it's not just working with teachers, but actually providing teachers with the skills to be able to access the technology and support learners, and so around the collaboration with governments. And you will see now, you can see why we were considering that maybe Kitabu could share with us a great deal of good practices. And this actually ties in very well with our next presentation by Zeynep Varolu from UNESCO. She is the program specialist in the Digital Innovation Transformation section of the Communications and Information sector at UNESCO in Paris. She's currently focused on the implementation of the UNESCO OER recommendation and the UNESCO ICT competency framework for teachers, which you will share a little with us about today, as well as initiatives in open, distance, flexible, and online education. And she's also co-responsible for Learning for All, guidelines for the inclusion of learners with disabilities in open and distance learning, and the UNESCO project officer for the development of the UNESCO guidelines for open education resources in higher education. Zeynep, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you much. Thank you for the introduction. Let me put my camera on. There we go. And I will share my screen. I think my could I share the screen? It seems it's deactivated. Would that be okay? Is it possible to
could you jump in there with that? And in the meantime, while you're sorting that out, a reminder, if you haven't done so already, to rename yourselves with the number of the breakout room that you want to join. 1, 2, or 3. Thank you. Thank you, Angelique, and over to you, Zeynep.
Okay, thank you. So I think my presentation will link very closely to the precedent one. I think if I'm not if I'm correct, e-kitabu means basically e-book. So I'm going to be speaking about the UNPRPD joint project on design and implement it to support countries to design and implement disability inclusive response and recovery planning for COVID-19 and what UNESCO is doing in it. And we are moving from, we're actually looking also not just at the level of the educational resource, but also at the level of the systems and the different policies in this area. So basically within the big picture, if you like, in this is that we have basically 4 products that we're developing in this project. The first one is a simple checklist on the UNESCO guidelines for the inclusion of learners with disabilities. And then a repackaging and adaptation of some resources we have on our work with inclusive and sustainable cities, and then webinars on these 2 resources, and then a policy brief on integrating on a combined report, based on a combined report on planning and delivering of ODL for learners with disabilities by education policymakers, educators, local governments, media, and information professionals, particularly during the COVID-19 period. Now, you might have noticed I have outcome 1 and outcome 3. So what happened to outcome 2? Outcome 2 is making these resources accessible. And today I'm going to focus mainly on the first point, which is the checklist.
Yeah.
And is everything okay?
And something else other than this stuff? No, just these. Okay, cool.
Could I just ask if you're not seeking to mute yourselves, please, so that we can hear Zainab and interpreters can hear her as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be talking about the guidelines and the checklist. So what are these guidelines? The guidelines were actually developed in 2015, and it was seen at the time, at least in the discussions we had, that this was, why use open distance learning? It wasn't that important, etc. And it seems that things have changed. The rationale, of course, is that 1 billion people, 15% of the world has a disability. Its development is not the same or level or pace in every country. It's central to the CRPDs, the SDG 4, and of course, COVID responses. And it's developed by UNESCO and international, regional, and national partners. And it focuses on open solutions. Now, open solutions, we mean open licensing. So I will give you definitions on this, but we're talking about open licensing of educational resources, so books and videos, etc., and software and access to open source guidelines. I'm sorry, OA, open access to peer-reviewed journals. The definition of persons with disabilities that's used in the document is from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, 2006. And in addition, open and distance learning is defined. This is a little bit old school. It's 2003. First, to the provision of flexible educational opportunities in terms of access and multiple modes of knowledge and acquisition. Open and ODL refers to any scheme of education or training that seeks systematically to remove barriers to learning, whether they be concerned with age, time, place, or space. This was actually a pretty exciting definition in 2003, and it was referring to open universities, which at the time were universities that had over 100,000 registrations. Times have changed, but the definition is still quite relevant. Open and educational resources, it's a large part of UNESCO's program. We actually have a normative instrument. So this is the closest UNESCO gets to making laws. It's an instrument, a recommendation where member states have agreed to work in this area. There is a more complex definition, but basically this is a good summary. And basically, open educational resources are any educational materials, books, videos, what have you, that are in the public domain or have an open license. An open license, quite bluntly, is usually a Creative Commons license, which allows you to share, reshare, reprocess, and to share, to remix. This is in the definition, and it's part of our larger program for education and for knowledge sharing. It's part of the principle of universal access to information for UNESCO. Free and open source software, we're talking about software that's designed by a person or group and then distributed freely for use, open access, provision of free access to peer-reviewed scholarly and research information. So what's inside these guidelines? We have, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast. Just go quietly. Okay. The most important thing is that this version that's been revised for the COVID response are guidelines for emergency movement to online and distance learning. It's a recognition that you have to jump into this mode quickly and effectively in order to survive. I think that's what we've all experienced, and we've seen our partners in the educational institutions going through this. There are a number of guidelines in this area. I'm not going to read through every single type of guideline, but I will just go through this one slide because it is actually really relevant to what we're talking about. It's that educational institutions should be guided by national policy to the types of content and timelines for program completion, identification of any disabilities or other special needs to be addressed through ODL, use of OER and OA should be open educational resources, and open access to scientific information should be sought as accessible content may already be available. Appropriate staff should be identified to liaise with students and their families. Selection of appropriate platforms or systems which accommodate all students. The provision of devices and access to internet resources is required. Additional funding may be required to provide devices, training, and other infrastructure for ODL. This is a great wish list, but this is what's necessary in order for things to function well. The document also goes through guidelines for state educational stakeholders in this document, governments, institutions, instructors, and quality assurance and qualification recognition bodies in this same area of using open and distance learning for inclusive education. Now, what's interesting is that we also have guidelines for actions to be taken before, during, and after the establishment of programs, and we have emergency response actions which were included into this document. And this is the checklist that we mentioned, that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. That's the emergency response actions. It's selecting and utilizing platforms, developing ODL content in an emergency situation, assessing student needs. In terms of the prerequisite actions, we're talking about selecting platforms again, devising content, considering modalities, and again, using the platforms for the implementation actions, streamlining content, support modalities, and then the monitoring, the assessing and adjusting of these same platforms, determining sustainability of content, and examining modalities. Now, this seems quite logical and quite pragmatic, but in the first discussions, it seems that things are sort of put into place afterwards. And the main message here is that you have to think before you set up systems, think to making those systems accessible, because it's very difficult to make them accessible after the fact, and it's more expensive too. This is the emergency.
Sorry, just to let you know, we have 1 minute left.
Okay, then I'll just focus on this and jump to the end of my presentation, okay? This is the emergency checklist. I will send it out, I'll put it into the chat and you can go through it, but this is the main product that we have produced in this area that talks about what are the actions stakeholders should take. Now I'm going to jump right through. We don't need to jump through all this. And then at the end, we have a list of accommodations for specific functional areas in terms of vision, hearing, mobility, learning disabilities, and speech. And these are areas in which institutions are asked to take actions as they set up different courses or as they modify different courses. So with that, we also have some information on free and open software that's available. That's here. There's some examples on the slide. And a list of key terms and OER sources and a glossary. Glossaries are very good for these kinds of documents because everyone seems to use the same words, but it's important that they're sure that they mean the same thing. And so with that, I stop my presentation. stop it. And I thank you very much for your time, and I will share the checklist for sure with Sian, perhaps, who can perhaps share it with the others. And I would be very interested in learning more about different activities that are going on and how these tools can actually be effective for the different users and what we can do to make sure that they are actually of value and of use, and how we can be implemented, and also how they could be shared, and what we could do to work together to make them not just pieces of paper, but something that actually makes the change that it's meant to make. Thank you very much for inviting me, and that's
thank you, Zainab, for your time. I'm so sorry we had to cut you short, because you have a great deal of knowledge and wealth to share with us. And as you were speaking, there were several requests to, please can we have all the presentations, and please can we have access to these different documents. So please do share with us your presentation, and we can upload them on the IDDC website for others to see. And of course, the recording will be available. But I think you make some very interesting points there around, distance education is not new. It's been brought to the fore now. We've been sort of catapulted into this situation. And I do think it's here to stay. So we do have to work very hard ensuring that, as you said, rightly said towards the end, accessibility and thinking of all learners needs to be there from the beginning, not an afterthought. And at the moment, that's kind of the tendency. But I think some of your slides there and some of the information you shared will be very helpful to us. And I think you were down for breakout, so I'm looking forward to some more discussions. Zainab, you wanted to say something.
We have one normative instrument in this area of open solutions, and it's the only normative instrument in the whole UN system. It's on open educational resources, and inside it there is a specific section on ensuring accessibility. And in the preamble, the UN Convention in this area. This is something that in our work, we really are working to make sure that everything is part of a cohesive whole, and it's part of a strategy rather than an add-on. So I think it's really important to say that it's part of discussions quite a bit in our work on open solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please share that with us as well. Thank you. Thank you, Zainab. And now to our last presentation of the session. Last but not least, we're talking about access to learning. We're talking about accessibility for people with disabilities. Well, I think it's really apt that we end with an input from someone with a disability, Maria Njeri, who is a cerebral palsy advocate from Kenya. For those of you who've heard Maria before, you know that she will be energetic and inspiring. Maria is a diversity, inclusion consultant and disability advocate. She has experienced cerebral palsy and managed to achieve most of her milestones. These are her words, not mine. Maria leads her own organization, Jerry Maria Foundation, working also with Leonard Cheshire as global youth advocate and a disability inclusion facilitator with Light for the World. She's a contributor to, has worked in many organizations such as UNGAI in the UK and Kenya, with CBM Kenya and others. Her passion is in capacity building for disability inclusive structures in communities, ensuring inclusive education for girls with disabilities, and encouraging sustainable systems to facilitate a more inclusive generation. So we look forward very much to hearing from you, Maria. Over to you. Thank you. Maria, sorry, I think you're on mute or we can't hear you. Would you mind checking your microphone, please? I mean, from where I'm sitting, I don't see that you're on mute, but there we are, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Perfect, absolutely perfect. Thank you, Maria.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I am so honored to come after fantastic speakers. I've been jotting down notes. But for me, I think digital learning has been exaggerated by the global pandemic. In Kenya, following the government precautions and the closure of education institutions, we all had to adapt to the way we teach and learn, and the whole world had to rethink how education works. Also, in considering that every child does deserve equal access to education and learning. However, children with disabilities have unfortunately been left behind in this crisis in most developing countries. Experts are drawn to consider that poverty and disability are cross-related. I have witnessed many families with children with disabilities unable to afford their access to digital learning. The challenge is in accessing the basic internet connection, accessing the online platforms, and to community e-learning hubs. And of course, not until recently, when we have seen the need of disability inclusive platforms and mainstream channels. E-learning or digital learning was beneficial for children with disabilities, but also it put families at risk of being vulnerable to local community theft and vulnerable to abuse and increase of neglect and violence at home. Ensuring children with disabilities have access to learning during crisis and ensuring their safety and well-being is crucial. Safeguarding of children with disabilities become a measure of disability inclusive policies in child protection and internet laws. I want to mention you can find guidelines of disability inclusive safeguarding from them. Recently published safeguarding guidelines by Able Child Africa. Financial backing from government and the relevant stakeholders to facilitate reasonable accommodations and ensuring proper training of facilitators, training of e-learning content creators and producers is crucial. Safeguarding not only prevents physical abuse, but also psychosocial and emotional abuse. We must ensure children with disabilities are not placed in situation, we highlight the impairments and limitations. Considering the use of non-discriminatory language, e-learning characters with disabilities, and non-stigmatizing formats. Children with disabilities are of course more prone to cyberbullying and online violence. They are more prone to cyber theft, easily giving away their personal information. They are also prone to exclusion and isolation as compared to a classroom setup. Their reduced interaction in digital learning can lead to depression and exclusion and reduce social and emotional development progress. The digital divide has emphasized that children with disabilities are more vulnerable, need more supervision and disclaimer support. What is necessary is we need to have open conversations about safeguarding and protection of children with disabilities in various aspects, and that we are comfortable to open up and confide in. It is also important to create awareness to the society, to the parents, to the teachers, to the stakeholders in accessing digital learning. I have come to note it is everyone's role to identify the risks and the dangers of children with disabilities and try and mitigate and also implement the solutions to ensuring that they are safe and ensuring that no child is left behind in accessing inclusive education, whether in physical learning or in digital learning. Thank you.
Sorry, my mic was on mute. Thank you so much, Maria. I think there were so many messages there, and I think you've ended the session bringing together a number of strands there about non-discrimination, about stakeholder engagement, the importance of including children, parents, and teachers in the discussions around safeguarding. And that the point you made about non-discriminatory language on resources used on digital learning, I think it's some very important points, and we need to identify those risks and dangers and have a broad discussion around safety for digital learning. Well, I'd like to thank all the presenters and will all join us in our different groups. I just want to now remind us, and we are running a little short on time, so I will remind us that breakout 1 will be led by Dipti and Fede, breakout 2 by Maria and Lauren, and breakout 3 by myself, Will, and Georgine, and Suzanne will also join us. So without further ado, maybe Angelique, maybe I pass on to you just to say, do we now just go to our rooms, or how does it work now? And we will come back in 20 minutes, and then I will hand over to Lauren to have another sort of hopefully 10 minutes at the end to bring it all together and wrap up.
Thank you, Shan. So as mentioned, we will now start the breakout rooms. You will be automatically assigned to them based on the number you provided. You can, if you still want to move, you can still do it manually. All those that are staying for the inclusive safeguarding breakout room, you will stay in the plenary together with our interpreters and captioner. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good continuation in the breakout room, and see you in around 20 minutes. You should have received all the message inviting you, if you're in breakout room or one, inviting you to them.
Hi everybody, so this is breakout room 2. So we're going to be talking about inclusive safeguarding in digital learning. Maria, are you there? Just checking that you're here.
Yeah, hello. Hi everyone.
Fab. Can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing at the moment? Someone to shout out yes. Yeah, yes. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Sandrine. Okay, in which case I'll hand over to Maria to chair this session. I'll just be keeping notes, but thanks everybody.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you everyone again for joining. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, this is an open conversation, and I want you to feel comfortable enough to confide and to open up as we go through some of the key pointers in safeguarding children with disabilities in accessing e-learning. And I want to proceed ahead with a few questions, and you're open to just put on your mic and speak out. So the first question is, what are the opportunities, or what opportunities have arisen to improve the safeguarding of children with disabilities within the context of digital learning? And I just want to maybe kick it off. And one of the opportunities that have arisen is the reasonable accommodations for the children who are previously unable to go to school because of the distance or the mobility, now have access to learning because of e-learning. Anyone else? Then, would you want to recommend?
Hey Maria, yeah, I'll jump in. So something that we've been hearing a little bit about in our projects is that some parents have been happier that, or have been excited by the fact that their children have been able to learn at home, because they feel like that there may be safer environments for those children at home, because they are less likely to come across kind of bullying or abuse or stereotype stigma within the school environment. Now, whether or not that is, you know, has an overall benefit isn't clear, but there is definitely an aspect of this which means that parents feel that their children are safer at home because they are less exposed to types of emotional abuse that they may experience at schools. So I don't know if anyone else in the group has heard of that, or if there are any kind of similar conversations that are going on in projects that you all work on.
For the purpose of not feeling too lonely, I'll jump in. So within HI, we really saw the benefit of the children being able to use some ICT that we had to provide during the COVID situation. So we already knew the benefit before and were promoting it, but I think it's been really for all of us, the COVID has shed light on problems that were existing before, but now we really had to respond. So I think it's been really useful in a way. But for me, really, the safeguarding is kind of coming afterwards, unfortunately, and wasn't really thought before. I've only heard about some good thing, and I think it was done with the UN in South America, where they've been working on this for a long time. But for us, it's really, so I was really happy to join this session, because I think there's really a need. So sorry, I'm a bit jumping to the next one, but I see several potential issues to what content children can access, but also about the data of the children that they are sharing potentially on platforms, everything. So yeah, benefit of accessing ICT, even if we all know that resources are very scarce and it's been difficult to respond to all. But for us, it's been the opportunity to make some nice project with the Kitabu, for example. So I think it's overall pretty positive, or at least we had the opportunity to do a little bit more of advocacy to governments.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Maybe somebody had jumped onto the next question. You can proceed to the next question. If risk of digital learning, taking a more prominent role in education, especially for children with disabilities.
I can start us off again quickly, Maria, if you like.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So this is an example that we were talking about as the IDDC Inclusive Education task coordinators, and also the Inclusive Safeguarding Group, which we both had reports of. So Sian was talking about this, and a couple of our partners were also speaking about this, which is that there is a worry that handing out technology to families of children with disabilities might actually cause issues and create risks for those families. So there was a report, I think, that Sian had mentioned, that was of families who are perhaps more targeted anyhow in communities, being handed out iPads so that their children with disabilities can kind of access some of the learning, and that those families then were being targeted even further within communities for kind of having many contexts where you're handing out expensive technology. But I suppose one of the additional risks or additional layers was that these families were already targeted anyhow and perhaps were slightly more vulnerable, and the additional risk of handing out more expensive technologies was something that kind of organisations needed to consider. So that was one thing that we'd raised as COVID.
I would also consider as a risk, probably just to maybe reinforce what you've just mentioned, is that in families that are considered to be poor or probably vulnerable, once a technology like an iPad or so is given to families, they consider that their levels and placings in society have risen. So some people who could have considered assisting those families would now consider them as having improved status, so they do not deserve assistances that should have been given to families of children with disability. Then the other bit I also consider could probably be a risk is not properly guided on the use of the kind of information on these platforms or on the iPad, the potential of them drifting after learning into accessing information that are sometimes inappropriate for their age, which could lead them to begin thinking inappropriately. For example, if they begin accessing websites that has blue movies and the likes, then we are not being supportive enough to their cognitive development and learning. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. And that really stands out. Even on my presentation, I had to mention the need for disclaimer support, just like we do for every other child. We need to ensure that children with disabilities are not neglected to access inappropriate sites and also access like sites that are not beneficial for the ages. So thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else with thoughts?
I just need to talk about the last question. I just consider the interruption is one of the risks of digital learning and abusive communication as well. And also there's another risk, which is the criminal and exploitation, the child sexual exploitation or any domestic abuse. There's a quite a lot of risk for that for the digital learning. I think this is a point that I said. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. This is me again. It's because I see many risks or foresee many. I think, like you said, they're facing same risk as other children, and maybe some additional. I'm thinking of bullying. We all know about bullying also in European context, and I don't see why low-income country would not face the same issue. So I think this is something, and I think also as organization, probably we have not done enough. Also in terms of just digital security, regular principle. There's a lot of hacking or people trying to extract money from you with wrong messages or so. And I think we've been giving those material to some families and children and not necessarily done the right job to prevent them or to give them enough information about the risks of being online. I think also for me the issue of data that, to be considered. We also should inform people of what data they need to share, they don't need to share, or what they can access. So I think it's important for their own security, so that those data are not available to share for everybody. And also, I think probably not just right now, because it's always the credit or internet access issue. But I think in the long run, we also have to be careful, because everybody gets really excited with the tablets, sometimes for smaller children. But still, it might not be the best solution for children to spend too much time on screens. So that would be my contribution.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just jump in with one other thought? I'm wondering if there might also be a risk that the technology might be used as an excuse to further kind of isolate children with disabilities. So maybe to say, well, this child can learn at home, so therefore we don't need to put any provisions in place to enable them to actually physically attend school.
Yeah, that is a possibility, a major possibility. Thank you for sharing. Can we hop over to the next questions? And the next question is, what are the key factors organizations will need to consider to ensure? Oh, sorry about that. What lessons have been learned?
I think, Maria, I think you're right. I think you're right to go to 4. We've got a couple of minutes left, and probably that one's the best one to go for.
Yeah, what are the key factors organizations will need to consider to ensure children with disabilities are effectively safeguarded during online learning? And I just want to start this off and say, organizations need to ensure that their child protection policies and their policies incorporating e-learning are inclusive and accessible for children and persons with disabilities. So, in the policies, they need to consider disability frameworks. And then anyone else can jump on.
Hi, Joanna here, Deaf Child Worldwide. I don't know if you can see me. I think you mentioned this, Maria, in your presentation, really. But for us, I think, you know, working closely with the parents and the rest of the family is really important, so that they understand some of the issues we've just been talking about. Because for the first time, you know, education's taking place in the home. There is sort of nobody else there a lot of the time. So I think involving families is really important.
Thank you. Anyone else? And Lola, maybe you can also jump in on this one too.
Yeah, sorry. So I think one of the things that we've been talking about in our organisation is many children will perhaps have had more access to things online than perhaps some children with disabilities. So that's the first thing. And more than that, perhaps, as Joanna said, some families may be more used to being online than other families, especially families with children with disabilities. So one of the things that we think we want to do is provide kind of guidance, as Joanna was saying, for children with disabilities on how to use the internet safely. So kind of things to do and things not to do, things to look out for, how you interact online in a safe way, and explaining that to children in not only a child-friendly way, but also a disability inclusive way. So making sure that those children are kind of empowered to also kind of keep themselves safe whilst they are accessing digital learning. So that's something we're looking at the moment. So again, if any other organisations are thinking about doing that, do get in touch.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? We have 1 minute before we head on back to the main room. And I want to say thank you to everyone who joined in and participated in this breakout session.
Yeah, just raising awareness.
Yeah,
raising awareness, providing checklists on how to use this.
Safeguarding guidance, providing the information on how to go about safeguarding. It's a very sensitive discussion and practical actions. Information and awareness is very crucial in each step.
Yeah, I would also involve the major high-tech companies and organizations like UNESCO, who've been putting a lot of effort on digitalization or edtech, because I think it's really also important that all the mainstream dealing with digitalization for children and children with disability should make sure it's safe as well. So there could be specific control or that should already been provided by the providers at the beginning. That would save us some difficulties.
Hello.
So I think also advocacy to those major.
Great, thanks everyone. I think we're about to start the main session again, but that was really useful.
Yes, I confirm the main session is restarting now.
Can you see the Jamboard?
Yes.
Great. So I'm just gonna paste the link so you can also access directly. Sorry, I will just stop sharing for 1 second. And yes, here I just sent you in the chat the link to the Jamboard, and I will reshare my screen. For some reason, I couldn't find the chat when I was sharing. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon again. I'm Federica Settimi from the IDDC Inclusive Education Task Group, and we will be doing like an exercise, but maybe before we go to working together on the Jamboard, I wanted to ask to Deepti. Deepti, your presentation was great, and there was a lot of information there, and I wonder if you would like to continue, add something else before we do the exercise together.
Thank you, Fede. And no, I think we can proceed to the exercise. I know our timing has been shortened, but I think the main thing to just say to all the participants in this breakout is, I think the idea of the exercise is, yes, we do want to discuss the pitfalls and the challenges, but we also want to discuss the opportunity and think about ways in which we can learn from lessons and how we can actually build distance learning systems to be stronger. So, definitely share thoughts along all of those lines. But I'll stop there. I think it'll be great to go straight into the exercise.
Okay, so I will just read. So we have 3 slides with different questions. I will read the first 2. If you have access to the Jamboard already, you can already add sticky notes. But when you write like your proposed answer, please add your name or your email address so that we can come back to you after if we need further explanation. So the first question is, what opportunities have arisen to embrace digital learning in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, especially for learners with disabilities, for example, within the Kitabu and others? So I will read also the second one, and also what are the pitfalls of digital learning taking a more prominent role in the education of children, especially children with disabilities? You can feel free to respond, and I can add the sticky note with your responses, like as you wish. Now the floor is open. Feel free to respond. And Deepti, if you have something to add, feel free to jump in too.
Can I speak, Fede?
Of course, Marie, please.
Yeah, well, Deepti gave such a nice summary, you know, of everything that we have to take into account, you know, under the 6 Ps, as she says. I will just say a little bit from our experience. Will spoke about our collaboration in Kenya on the introduction of a low-cost refreshable Braille device, which was something very exciting. We actually started the project before lockdown, and what we found during lockdown to be the biggest opportunity is to start with, before we even reached the children, that we were able to reach the teachers remotely. So as all our donor-funded projects had to make a fast adaptation so that we don't lose contact with our beneficiaries, you know, we had to reorganize ourselves. So we did 2 things basically, and that is to optimize the time to do distance learning. And if I could go into small detail about this, we thought we'll do massive training now on the devices, but then we realized there's no knowledge of Braille, not with the learners, not with the teachers. And that's where the problem came in with mainstream teaching. You know, you don't have that motivation for mainstream teachers to necessarily learn Braille. So that immediately took us to a next level of finding the resources. And as Deepti said, the resources are all locked up in special education. But the majority of children with say, visual impairment and so are in mainstream settings, in any case, in our project. And so how do you marry the knowledge that's locked up in special education and make it available for teachers? So what we then did is to link up those Braille people who have knowledge of Braille, especially people in OPDs, and see how you can use OPDs more optimally as part of your rollout of training to build capacity of teachers. And then when you go to the next stage of learners, how to back that up, how to back learners up and give them ongoing support. Because, you know, over a period of 6 months, it was very effective, this whole training package that Will is talking about, and all the WhatsApp groups and the support. I mean, as a model, it worked very well. But the massive knowledge that is needed to get a real introduction of Braille in mainstream schools, I would say is something quite big, you know. That's just one element that I want to say. The next thing is we were very strong, as Will said, on saying assistive technology should be there to open up the curriculum. So for me, there are 2 legs to that. Is how can teachers use assistive technology to make learning more accessible? That is, how can they use software more optimally to adapt lessons, materials on a day-to-day basis? And secondly, how can assistive technology help individual learners with specific disabilities to have access to learn? And in a deep rural context, like we're facing, or most of the people working in sub-Saharan Africa, is as Deepti says, there are really so little ecosystems. There's no connectivity. We had to buy data bundles. We don't have large scale availability of equipment. We don't have a government system of funding this systematically. There's no buying at scale. So there are levels of systems that have to be introduced before you can say you can switch over to digital learning. Like it will take years, but I think one should set targets and see how every year you meet certain targets. Sorry, that's a mouthful from my side. Sorry. Thank you. I'll write it up for you, Fede. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I see that others are writing. If you want to add, we have only like 1 minute before we go to the next slide, a couple of minutes. So if you want to add anything.
Maybe one, sorry. It's on now. Yeah, one aspect to add, and actually it was just Marie who reminded me of that, because we got to know each other through a project in South Africa, and one of the responses that project found to the pandemic in teacher training was basically to change the mode of delivery, to have online symposiums and share materials in a different way. So there's definitely an opportunity that arose for digital learnings for teachers, but that does not mean that it equally applied to learners. So and that's, I think, where on the one hand, there are opportunities when we think of reaching teachers that are in training through universities, etc. But on the other hand, then do we necessarily reach learners, especially learners from, let's say, low income settings or rural settings, etc. I think that's where we move to the pitfalls, where it seems easy to produce materials and to disseminate materials, but then that does not necessarily mean that teachers have learners have access to it. So.
Okay. Okay, so I think we should thank you very much, and we'll go to see what are the next questions. What lessons have been learned? And I think also we heard a bit on that already, from the increased use of digital technology for home-based and distance learning to guide a future hybrid model. And second question is, what are the safeguarding implications for the increased use of digital technology for learning rather than face-to-face interaction in school? Again, feel free to add a sticky note if you are in Jamboard, or feel free to tell me and I will type in. I see appearing children continue to need access to a range of services, include support with digital learning. We should not lose that.
So Fede, I can come in on that. I put that in. I think just very quickly to say, I think the safeguarding angle is really important. And often we have these discussions separately. You know, we talk about distance learning, but we aren't at the same time talking about social protection or safeguarding protections. And this is a very good opportunity that we're actually discussing both together, because the idea then is that we can't lose the other supports that children need, that children with disabilities need. So, maybe they'll continue to have digital technologies for learning, but are they continuing to have also all of the supports they need for quality learning?
I think one aspect that comes in here is also quite often we think of, let's say, schools or other education services provide materials and maybe guidance to somebody in the family or at home to support the child. But that does not necessarily mean that parents, neighbors, social workers, whoever, are prepared to provide that service, either because they need to work or they haven't gone to school themselves or they don't. There's so many reasons why this doesn't work. But I've seen that, and that no matter whether that's in a developing country or now that I'm back in Germany, even here, my friends say, well, I don't have time to take care of educating my children because I'm also working from home. But schools just assume that the mother will sit with the children to do additional exercises, etc. So it's not even knowledge, or it's just competing resources. And I think those support systems in the family and community are often forgotten.
Even in low income contexts, just basic livelihoods that parents just having enough food takes away time for learning. And if you look at the kind of the physical spaces which children have in huts, in small villages, in very poor contexts, it's unthinkable that they don't even have a television. So the Kenyan government had these broadcast lessons which were not available to the children in the remote areas because they just didn't have electricity or that. Secondly, what we did find though in South Sudan is the radio clubs, the radio broadcasts of lessons, and having radio groups. That we worked there with the BBC Media Action. That was a huge, big initiative, national initiative to get learning out to deep rural areas in a difficult context. But then still the challenge was the children with disabilities were still out of school. DT already mentioned this, so it did not necessarily reach them. They were not considered to be eligible for schooling. Still, you still have to work through layers of discrimination to get the disabled children within these village reading clubs listening to the programs, and then you don't start talking about children who are deaf and how to make the learning accessible through radio clubs. So with each solution comes a whole range of steps that have to be taken to make it accessible for children with disabilities.
Thank you, Marie. Okay, here I see there's another, like maybe who wrote it? Direct interaction and communication between learners and teachers isn't easily realized in a digital learning setting. Teachers may not be able to read. Okay, this is from Veronica. That's a very good point, Veronica. Thank you. If you in case you want to jump in and say a bit more on that, feel free. Otherwise, we will go to the next slide.
No, thank you. I think it's all I can say on the subject. I just think it's really difficult for a teacher to see that a student is perhaps not getting the content that he is just trying, or she's just trying to teach, when they don't see the immediate reaction. So I think it's not so easy in a digital setting.
Okay.
I mean, just maybe one more comment on the safeguarding implications. We often, or a lot of learning that's being discussed at the moment has to do a lot with like self-guided learning, etc., doing your own research, etc. But that also means that materials that have not undergone any quality control become part of learning processes. There's no sounding board, no teacher, somebody where a child could say, I found this on the internet. Can you explain this to me, or put that into the right context? So there is definitely a challenge on quality, and that can have safeguarding implications as well, just beyond, let's say, low quality of content, but even problematic content. So who takes that role? Ideally parents, but again, they might be overwhelmed by the whole situation or not involved at all.
It's a very great point. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So, okay, we will pass to the last slide. Any additional thoughts or any of these questions on this topic? So yeah, please post here. We have a couple of minutes left. So yeah, feel free to talk or add a sticky note also here. Okay, I think in any case we had a very quick, but I think we had the opportunity to further reflect and you know, put the duck in a row from the discussions that we had before, from what we heard in the presentations, and yeah. Thank you very much for these inputs that will be used for the final report. And yeah, if we have further questions, in any case, we will also come back to you, to each of you.
Are we finished, or do we have half a minute left?
So we can speak for a few minutes until Angelique doesn't take us back to the plenary.
I just want to make this point that I think government should get transversal tenders to make buying more affordable, you know, and so that governments have clearer guidelines on exactly what it is that they have to procure that is available, low cost and useful, and then set a system in place for rolling it out. And I think that's where governments are still floundering around a lot.
And maybe to add, Marie, then the issue of accessibility comes in. So if they tender for computers or whatever, do they take into consideration reasonable accommodation, or is it just that they procure mainstream computers and assume that that will serve everyone?
They should mainstream disability within their ICT plans, I think. Yeah. That worked well in South Africa. You know, we got together and got a big treasury tender.
But I pass, you know, in because of time, straight over to Lauren. Thank you.
Great. So I'm just going to click onto this Mentimeter. Can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing? Just someone nod if you can.
Yep.
Yes. Fantastic. Okay. So I've put it in the chat as well. So if everybody could just quickly go to www.menti.com and use that code that I've just highlighted. I'll put it on the chat. We're trying something a little bit more interesting this time round. So I'll copy and paste it into the chat. What we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of little poll type things to try and summarize what people have really taken from the session. There's been an awful lot of content, and what we didn't want to do was have each session summarize the key points, but instead kind of almost take the temperature of where we're all at following that really interesting hour and a half that we've had. So once you got onto the link, the first question that we're going to ask you to do is, now when you're thinking about digital learning for children with disabilities, considering everything that you've just heard, what are the 3 words that really kind of come to mind? So if you go onto that website and you enter the code, that should be the first question that pops up. And hopefully, if this works, some answers should start popping up on the screen, but we'll see how we go. If it doesn't work, we might just start going around. There we go, fantastic. So I'm going to start reading them out just so everyone can access it. So we've got challenges. So first word that somebody thought of was challenges, and then the second was accessibility. We've got opportunity, nice and big there, which is exciting. Risk has also popped up. Another accessibility. Strong commitment, so that's very interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of advocacy that needs to be going alongside this, and affordability jumping out there, especially when we're talking about innovative solutions. But yeah, we've got risk and safe. Those words are also popping up. So again, just reminding ourselves that we need to be thinking about how we protect children with disabilities in those forums. low cost and no cost need. So we need some examples of this kind of e-learning, digital learning that don't kind of break the bank, that are affordable. Great. And I love that point. So teachers don't know how. So I think what we do when we think about digital learning, we always think about the kind of families and the children with disabilities, but one of the key kind of pieces in that puzzle are the teachers, and teachers understanding how to make those e-learning modes accessible. Okay, seeing as we've got just a couple of minutes, I'm going to skip through. Let's hopefully see if this works. I'm going to skip past this one. I'm going to go to this one. So considering everything you've just heard, again, I'm going to ask you to think of what are the 3 things that we as a sector need to do to ensure that children with disabilities are included in digital learning. So this isn't kind of, this is the INGO sector, this is you guys in your jobs, in our programs. What are the 3 things that you would need to focus on, or you think we should be focusing on, considering everything that we've just heard? What would be your priorities? We had some interesting chats about this in our group, which we ended the conversation on. So it'll be good to hear from everybody on this one. We'll wait for some words to pop up. Hopefully they will. Okay, great. So risk assessments, great. I like this. We're being kind of a very risk averse group, but yes, indeed, risk assessments. We need to co-design. So again, the inclusion of people with disabilities, and I would even say children with disabilities and their families from the offset, really. We've got advocates. So again, yes, there's some buy-in that needs to happen, that we need to kind of get teachers on board. We need to get policymakers on board that just providing e-learning and digital learning isn't enough. We need to connect with research. And I think that really speaks to a lot of what we've heard today, with some real great evidence coming out around what does work and what doesn't work. We need to prioritize accessibility. We need to fund it. We need to build evidence. Again, that word evidence. We need to make sure that we can tell providers, we can tell governments that there is a need for this, and these are the impacts that they can expect if they do accessible e-learning. We've got access to ICT. Again, I think that's one of the things we haven't really touched upon today, but big thing for families of children with disabilities is we need to, where there's a big assumption here that people are actually accessing ICT and know how to use it in the first place. Capacity building, great. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I've got 1 minute. I'm going to hand over to Sian just to close us off. But that was really fun, and I think a bit more of an interesting way of actually ending the session. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks everyone.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and congratulations, Lauren, for helping us have an innovative end to a digital learning session. I thought that was a great way to finish off. But it would be remiss of me not to give a great big thank you to absolutely everyone involved, Angelique particularly, all the organization you've managed in the background, and our sign language interpreters and closed captionists today. You've worked very hard. I would like to extend a big thank you to all the co-coordinators who've helped make this session possible, with Lauren, Anya, Julia, and Fede. And of course, the biggest thank you to our presenters who've actually helped engender the discussion, and to you who joined. And please continue to pose your comments on the Jamboard. They're available and open. It's really important, because out of this today, the IDDC Inclusive Education and Safeguarding Task Groups would like to produce a leaflet or produce some kind of document that we think is much needed and will highlight resources, pitfalls, opportunities, safeguarding issues. And we would like, if any of you would like to volunteer to assist us in that process, please get in touch. But have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are, and continued enjoyment of the IDDC General Assembly. And thank you all very, very much. Goodbye.